The Narcissist Hunting Grounds. The Life Coach. Hello, I'm HG Tudor. Narcissists are drawn to certain areas as hunting grounds which cater to the prime aims. In order to cater to the prime aims, there must be victims. There must be individuals, people, or appliances as we see them, who are there to be controlled. These appliances must be there to provide fuel to the narcissist. This is the narcissist's lifeblood. And if you want to understand the importance of fuel and how it works, you must read my book, Fuel. These appliances also cater for the provision of character traits. Do watch my video about character trait acquisition, and residual benefits. Residual benefits are things such as access to networks, management of the facade, the provision of a place to live, the enjoyment of sex, and often the provision of money. A narcissist's narcissism wants the narcissist to cater to those prime aims to the fullest extent, i.e., it wants to find individuals, or at least an individual, that is easy to control, that provides lots of fuel, character traits, and residual benefits. Thus, it seeks particular areas of life where those particularly attractive to the narcissist victims can be found. Think of it in terms of a farmer. The farmer wants to produce a crop which is bumptious, that is bountiful. It produces, for instance, the tastiest corn with many ears of it, that's grown easily and produces a fantastic yield. Thus, he seeks to cultivate a particular place where the soil is conducive to growing that corn with the minimum of effort, with the maximum yield, with the tastiest corn which is then sold for the best price. The narcissist is similar. The narcissist, usually subconsciously, but in some instances where an aware narcissist does so consciously, seeks out a particular place, a particular area of life where the best victims can be found, the ones that are easiest to control, the ones that will produce the most fuel, character traits, and residual benefits. There are lots of different hunting grounds, and I cover some of the more usual ones in my book, Sitting Target. But also, in relation to those hunting grounds, you have more specific places. So, by way of an example, a political environment is one which attracts lots of narcissists because it caters to the prime aims. It allows the narcissist to lay their hands on power, political or governmental power, which they can then use to control potentially millions of people. Their exposure to wielding such power and invariably prominence means that there's a lot of fuel that they can receive as a consequence of being involved in the political sphere. They will meet and involve and deal with many different people, which allows them to acquire so many different character traits. And wielding political power enables them to access many residual benefits, to manage a facade of being that caring politician that is invested in the country's fate, of having access to networks and information which can then be used to apply against the other aspects of the prime aims, to make money from political connections, in some instances as straightforward as embezzlement. Accordingly, politics draws lots of narcissists to it because, first of all, it's an environment that caters to the prime aims, and also, because it's an environment that attracts lots of narcissists, it becomes the case that in order to succeed, The individuals that are best placed to succeed in that environment, because it's infested with narcissists, are other narcissists. There are many different hunting grounds like politics, and I'm going to be taking you to some of them to understand more about why do narcissists go there, why do narcissists find themselves attracted to these particular hunting grounds, and also providing you examples of narcissists in action to help you understand more about the attraction. The first in this series is the life coach. Why is it that the life coach attracts many narcissists? I make it clear that not all life coaches are narcissists. That would be preposterous. But there is a higher representation of narcissists amongst this particular occupation. Narcissists are disproportionately represented. And the reason for it is that essentially the narcissist is deluded as to their abilities. For instance, they believe that they know more than they actually do, that they've got greater influence than they actually have. They have this delusion of grandeur, whereby they believe that they're capable of fixing anybody's problem, that they have the answer to anybody's issue, and therefore that means that they are best suited to aiding people with regard to whatever problem it is that they have in their life that they want to overcome. It attracts the narcissist because by offering the supposed help, that's a conduit to controlling that particular client or viewers or readers. By appearing to offer the solutions, and in some instances, there are life coaches that are narcissists that do provide solutions, do provide answers. It's not to say that they're all incredibly useless. That's not the case. But the point is that the ability to offer solutions and help to somebody that is coming, perhaps sometimes in despair, provides a very easy route and an easy environment for control to be asserted. Similarly, the desperation of those that are seeking help or are wanting guidance, who want someone to keep them on the straight and narrow, to help them live their best life, that awful phrase, invariably means that person is quite emotive. They express themselves, they talk about how all of this is making them feel, and that makes them receptive to the guidance of the life coach. So they respond to that, providing emotional responses which provide large amounts of fuel to that life coach. Often these individuals are vulnerable also, confused, seeking some form of guidance and stability in what might be a turbulent life, and therefore in the circumstances. Then provides the opportunity for the narcissist to exploit that by way of garnering lots of fuel from a grateful and dedicated client. The experience of that individual, of course, can be acquired by the narcissist by way of character traits to use in relation to other clients. And finally, of course, there's a residual benefit. The life coach can maintain a facade, presenting themselves as this kindly intervener, the guru that provides this guidance, that takes a lost soul and puts them on the right track towards success and freedom in their lives. It also enables money to be made. Significant amounts of money can be made as a consequence of that involvement. In many instances, real, actual constructive help is provided, and thus what is paid for is beneficial to that individual, and they may not find themselves abused by that narcissist life coach. It is entirely conceivable, and don't lose sight of the fact, that the narcissist life coach can have an interaction with their client which is a win-win situation. That individual gets the help and guidance they need, the narcissist controls them, gains the fuel, gets the residual benefits, and no abuse occurs. But of course, dependent on the type of narcissist that they're interacting with and their own behaviours which might threaten control, there is the potential and risk for there to be a downside. And as you will hear, when I provide you with a real-life example, there are instances where this downside is substantial and significant. Another attraction, of course, is that for the narcissism wants the easiest route to get to those prime aims. And invariably, this idea of the life coach is one where there's no regulation, there's no qualification. Someone simply sets themselves up as saying, I'm a life coach. I'll help you realize your dreams. I'll assist you in losing weight. I'll help you deal with your childhood traumas. I'll help you become the ace athlete that you want to be. I will provide you with the financial success that you deserve. They may have some useful life experience. They may have been successful in the real world in a particular field, and they want to translate that into sharing their experiences with others. There are, of course, other narcissists that are wholly deluded as to their capabilities and have no real talent, and therefore are more like a charlatan with regard to the provision of duff, useless, possibly even dangerous advice to individuals for which they're paid, and ostensibly they ought not to be paid for that poor advice that they have provided. But the fact is, the ease by which an individual can establish himself as a life coach will appeal to many narcissists, because the narcissism wants the easiest route to market, the prime aims, and therefore not having to sit examinations, not having to get certification, etc., means that somebody establishing themselves with the creation of a website and then talking to people and establishing a practice in that way would appeal to the narcissist. And thus, the field of life coach is one that attracts a greater proportion of narcissists than other areas for the reasons that I have outlined. It becomes one of the narcissist hunting grounds. That hunting ground of life coach is closely related to the hunting ground of the therapist, but I'll be dealing with that on another occasion. But I'm now going to take you to a real-life example of a narcissist that utilized the hunting ground of life coach with catastrophic consequences for a number of people. This originates from an article in the Daily Telegraph from a number of years ago. It's about a lady called Anne Craig, who is described as a life coach. The article states, what made two seemingly happy young women from loving homes sever all contact with their families and friends, renounce their inheritances, and vanish into thin air? Mick Brown of the Telegraph investigates how a self-styled personal development coach, i.e. life coach, digging for forgotten childhood memories, opened a door to catastrophe. Towards the end of 2016, the journalist received a telephone call asking whether he would be interested in talking to a woman named Anne Craig. She was described as a personal development coach. Craig was involved in an interesting case where she had been accused of attempting to separate young women who had been her clients from their families by implanting false memories of having been abused as children. A few months before the journalist received the call, Craig had appeared in court as a party to an action by a family who were attempting to gain access to documents from a Metropolitan Police investigation into Craig's activities in order to bring a civil case against her. Over the course of the case, the family had claimed that their daughter, who was not named, had been one of a number of young women whom Craig had brainwashed into believing their parents were guilty of horrendous behaviour towards them, attempting to dictate their every move, assertion of control, and isolation, them from family and friends, also a form of assertion of control. In a statement submitted to the court, the young woman in question said that any allegations against her family had come from her and not from Craig. Their sessions together, she said, had enabled her to express deeply held and private matters about her childhood, and had actually given her the strength to distance herself from her family. In another statement read out to the court, Craig said she was shocked and alarmed by the untrue allegations made against her, denial, and categorically denied that she used psychological techniques to encourage the young women to believe certain things that were untrue. Craig, her barrister said, viewed the case as part of a continuing campaign of harassment, victim mentality, blame shifting, conducted against her by the family. The family failed in their action against the police after the judge ruled that it did not meet the legal tests for forcing the police to hand over the documents. In the reporting of the case, much had been made of the allegations against Craig, but less about her allegations of harassment, and she had remained conspicuously quiet on the matter, refusing to comment publicly. The journalist hadn't paid much attention to the case at the time, but it wasn't until a telephone call asking if he wished to speak to Craig that his curiosity became aroused. He called the number. Craig was on a bus, and over the next 20 minutes she gave a confusing account of events, repeating her claims that she had been the victim of harassment, victim mentality, blame shifting, and accusing the police of negligence, blame shifting, in investigating her complaints. At one point she started to cry, pity play. Her life, she said, had been absolute hell. She wanted to tell her side of the story, so we arranged to meet. What the journalist had not expected was to become embroiled in a story of considerable complexity, calling into question the nature of memory, its fallibility, and its propensity to be manipulated. It's the story of a woman who was able to set herself up as a life coach with no training, no qualifications, and no supervision. The ease by which a narcissist can establish this position, as I explained earlier, with calamitous consequences. A story of the struggle between two mothers and the woman they believe has stolen their daughters from them. Above all, it is a story that raises urgent questions about the role of therapy in treating emotional problems and the need for stricter regulation of those who practice it. The journalist met Craig in a cafe of a London department store. He described her as in her mid-60s, a pale-looking woman with sharp features and long dark hair. Her face was devoid of makeup, and she spoke in a soft Irish accent. She's been variously called a therapist, holistic healer, and a life coach, but described herself to the journalist as a teacher, and her field being personal development. Over the course of 2 hours, she gave the journalist a truncated version of her history. She was born in Ireland, but came to England as a young woman. She worked as a stewardess and then a training manager for an airline. She married a Royal Navy commander and had a daughter. After a 4-year break, she took a job with Hampshire County Training, counselling young people on employment, and from there moved on to working for a large agricultural producer in Sussex, setting up training and development department for its employees and directors. I remember at the interview the finance director saying, "You're the type of person who will come in and take us absolutely apart bit by bit by bit, but then you'll put us all back together in the end," she told the journalist. And I did. In 1999, the family moved to London. Her husband frequently travelled, and her daughter was away at boarding school. Craig set up on her own, practicing personal development using a range of techniques including dream analysis and unblocking energies. Over the years, she had gained a certificate in counselling skills in the development of learning and had been a member of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, the professional body for people working in the field of HR. She said she had extensive professional work experience in this field. While anybody can set up in business calling themselves a therapist, Craig emphasised that was not how she described herself. In 2008, her daughter was visiting Florence, and it was there that she fell in with a group of young English women studying art at the Charles H. Cecil Studios, a prestigious training ground for aspiring artists, most from well-off families. When one of the group talked of suffering from unexplained fainting fits, Tara Craig suggested she should meet her mother. The sessions apparently helped, and over the course of the next year, up to a dozen young women, all of whom either knew or were referred by each other, became Craig's clients. All were privately educated and mixed in the same social circles. Some were in search of help for emotional problems, vulnerability. They were stuck in their development, as Craig would put it. Others came simply because they were intrigued by her methods of dream analysis. In Craig's phrase, all were on a journey. She conducted her sessions at her home in Camberwell, South London. She would charge £90, a fee that over the years that would rise to £125. Residual benefit. Conventionally, therapy sessions last for 50 minutes, but Craig's could run up to 3 hours and sometimes longer, supplemented by phone calls and email exchanges. Most therapists, she told me, don't go far enough. Grandiosity. Dealing with her clients, it was necessary to get to the very root of the problem. And in all the women's cases, she said, this was relationships, particularly with their parents. A certain group of people would say, I can't take my mother's anger anymore, and I want to know why. I look at a pattern, and then take it back and back until you actually get to the root of that. And then you take it out of the root, and that is the only way it is ever going to dissipate. What she was describing, the journalist said, sounded far removed from the HR skills she had been trained in. She agreed. But if you're doing personal development, you're doing emotions. I've been to counsellors myself who've never gone deep enough. If someone has really done the work on themselves, they can take you wherever you need to go because they have that understanding. It was not until much later that she would go into more detail about what this work entailed. One by one, the group of young women stopped seeing Craig. By early 2014, only 3 remained. One was a 24-year-old named Victoria Kaiser, another an artist named Laura Hugh Williams. Both had been seeing Craig for almost 4 years, and both had broken off completely from their families and friends. Influence isolation makes them easier to control. Victoria's father is Charles Kaiser, an investment banker. Her parents had divorced, and in 2008, her mother Amanda married Nicholas Alexander, the 7th Earl of Caledon. Victoria had not been one of the Florence group. She was introduced to Craig by a friend in 2010 towards the end of her first year at Leeds University, where she studied English. Victoria had been suffering from eating issues, vulnerability. She told her mother that Craig was helping her by using dream analysis and Reiki, a healing technique based on the idea that an unseen life force energy flows through us. Craig assured Victoria that she could cure her in 3 years. Grandiosity. Future faking. Also bear in mind that, as I understand, that from licensed therapists, you would never state that you would be able to cure somebody. That goes against the ethical approach. Amanda Caledon told friends that she was alarmed by such a specific promise, but because Victoria seemed happy with the arrangement, she felt it might be beneficial for a short period. After leaving university, Victoria moved to a flat in London and worked as a tutor. By 2012, her family had begun to notice a marked change in her behaviour. She became increasingly remote and uncommunicative. On one occasion, over dinner with her father, she talked darkly of abuse, without specifying exactly what she meant. Due to spend Christmas with him, she failed to turn up. A few months later, she cleared the last of her belongings from her parents' houses. Within a few weeks, she had broken off with her family and all her friends, including her boyfriend. Fearing for her daughter's well-being, Lady Caledon employed a private investigator who interviewed other young women who had been Craig's clients. The Caledons discovered that Laura Hugh Williams had also broken with her family after seeing Craig and made contact with her parents. Laura's father, Timothy, is a retired stockbroker. Her mother, Sarah, is now married to businessman Henry Strutt. In February 2014, lawyers acting for the Caledons wrote to Craig accusing her of manipulating Victoria, Laura and others by implanting false memories, leading the young women to believe that their parents had been guilty of the most heinous of crimes, and encouraging them to cut themselves off from their family and friends. It would appear, the letter alleged, that not only are you using this as an opportunity to extract money from the targets, residual benefit, but you are also seeking to use them for your own emotional needs, manipulation, drawing of fuel. The letter demanded that Craig cease communicating with the targets forthwith. Craig replied through her lawyers, vehemently denying the charges. Denial, nullification of threat to control. Matters quickly escalated. Craig had moved to Battersea, and in June 2014, anonymous leaflets were posted through the letterboxes of Craig, her neighbours and her daughter with the warning, Holistic healer Anne Craig has moved into your street. Your daughters are in grave danger. Claiming that Craig would implant false memories and pressure them into believing you, their loving parents, had abused them as children. It included Craig's address. Printed on the leaflet was a photograph of Craig's parents' gravestone in Ireland. Seeing it as a death threat, Craig reported it to the police, who investigated but were unable to determine who had posted the leaflets. Matters took a further dramatic turn in August. Having discovered where Victoria was living, Amanda Calladan posted a birthday card through her daughter's letterbox and left a tiny bunch of flowers on her doorstep. A few weeks later, she posted a book on the risk of psychological abuse in therapy, along with a letter warning her against Craig through Victoria's door. The next day, acting on an allegation of harassment from Victoria, 7 police officers in 2 cars and a van arrived at Lady Calladan's home and placed her under arrest. She was taken to a police station but immediately released when the custody sergeant decided it was a case of wrongful arrest. But the incident led the police to look more closely at the background to these events, with the result that their investigation now took a 180-degree turn and focused on Anne Craig. 4 other young women came forward and gave statements, telling how, following lengthy sessions with Craig, they had experienced growing feelings of hopelessness and of negativity towards their closest family and friends. On the basis of those interviews, on the 27th of October 2014, 4 plainclothes police officers arrived at Craig's home. She was taken to a police station and booked on 3 charges: fraud, administering a noxious substance, and occasioning psychological actual bodily harm. The noxious substance charge arose from 2 women claiming to have felt drowsy after being given a drink by Craig. That charge and the psychological ABH charge were dropped, but Craig was bailed on the 3rd charge of fraud for 6 months. In what appeared to be a deliberate strategy to remove the women from her influence, under her bail conditions, she was prohibited from seeing or communicating with any of her clients, a stipulation that Craig described as being under house arrest, exaggeration, dramatization. What exactly went on in Anne Craig's sessions with her young clients? The journalist spoke to a number of young women who had seen Craig between 2009 and 2013. None of them wished to be named. One told me that she had first gone to Craig in 2011, recommended by a friend, because she was interested in Craig's techniques of dream analysis. She had seen Craig on a monthly basis, the sessions concentrating largely on Craig questioning the young woman about her family relationships, prying intrusiveness, lack of boundary recognition. Between sessions, she would email her dreams to Craig, discussing them in depth at the following session, with Craig asking questions that the young woman said she found very intrusive, lack of boundary recognition, lack of emotional empathy, very negative. It was always about my mother. If there was a peach in my dream, it would be my mum sucking the joy out of my life. It was a way of putting ideas into your head. I definitely felt like my relationship with my mother was getting worse. Craig would also give homework, suggesting the young woman needed to see less of her friends and family to work on herself, which of course is part of her isolating from other people that might affect the narcissist's control over her and removing her support networks. One exercise involved the young woman drawing a heart and writing in it the names of those closest to her. Then she'd say, "I think that's a lot of people for you to carry, don't you think?" As if I was responsible for those people and should be cutting them out of my life. It seemed that everything was twisted in a very dark way, and everything I would bring up was always turned into a negative. I felt I was overanalyzing everything and had all these issues that I never ever had before. As time went on, she said, the exchange of emails became more frequent. Hoovering, assertion of control, and Craig started telephoning her. Hoovering, assertion of control, intrusiveness, lack of boundary recognition, suggesting the young woman needed to start seeing her every 2 weeks, increasing her control rather than once a month. It's very invasive because you start to have this contact with this one person every single day, and she becomes your world. Now, As you know, this is a standard tactic of the narcissist to make them your world, so that you become wholly reliant upon the narcissist, so that you're easier to control. It felt like she was trying to cut me off from everything, as if I would have a new identity with her, and she would become my mother. Eventually, she telephoned Craig to say she no longer wanted to see her. I was scared of her. I just wanted it to end as quickly as possible. Another girl who had gone to see Craig for help with feelings of depression described how, on her first session, Craig told her to lie back on the couch, saying that she was going to practice a form of Reiki and read my dreams. The girl promptly fell asleep. When she woke up, Craig told her that she had dreamed of being 5 years old, at a party at her grandmother's house, and being in a dark cupboard at the top of the stairs. I said there wasn't a cupboard at the top of the stairs in that house. I said maybe the house I grew up in, and she said yes, that was it. This exhibits the magical thinking of the narcissist believing that she can read somebody's dreams whilst they're asleep. And she said something very frightening happened to you in this cupboard, but I hadn't understood it at the time. None of it made any sense to me. I said I would see if my parents could remember anything. She said, don't speak to your parents about it. Nullification of threat to control. They won't understand. Smearing. Craig suggested another session, but unsettled by the experience, the young woman never returned. Another, Angela, her name has been changed, started seeing Craig in 2011. She was 23 and deeply confused about her sexuality, vulnerable, and fearful of the consequences of telling her family and friends that she might be gay. Craig suggested she would need up to 8 sessions. One of the first things she said was, I break you down and I put you back together. Then you'll have finished your journey and you can go on in your life to have the career, the social relationships and everything you've ever wanted. Promised gain. She started to see Craig once every 2 weeks, then once a week. It would be 18 months before she finally broke off with her. She described the sessions as being replete with symbolism, colours, dreams, marks on paper, talk of spirits. Anne would say, I'm sensing that today we should talk about your mother. That's what the spirits have told me. Magical thinking, grandiosity. There was a big part of me that felt spirits, really? But I had this open-mindedness that even if this was all a bit strange, I'm going to go with it. She would lie down on a couch and Craig would practice what Angela described as a sort of sacrocranial massage. I would usually fall asleep for 20 minutes and then wake up, and she would tell me what she had seen during the healing session, magical thinking. I can see that you're starting to let go of your mother. As homework, Craig would encourage her to write angry and negative things each day. Manipulation, using her left hand, because that connects to the heart, not the head, and everything should come from the heart, and then burn what she had written. And of course, every time you wrote something and burned it, you would just reiterate everything you were being moulded to be. She Pavlov dogged us. She really sculpted us to be negative, angry people. Assertion of control. Like other clients of Craig, she claimed she was encouraged to cut off all contact with her friends and told that she should empty herself by not reading newspapers, magazines or books. Assertion of control, isolation. She said, you don't need all this information. It's much better to listen to yourself. There were, however, some books that Craig told her clients to read. The works of the poet Sylvia Plath and Jonathan Livingston's Seagull, New Age fable about a seagull that rejects the stultifying conformity of the flock and flies off on its own journey of self-discovery. Everything you're getting over many, many sessions is that you don't need these people anymore, Angela told the journalist. She would say, other people are always from the head, but we are from the heart. And gradually you would realise that all the people in your life are from the head, and bless them. It might not be their fault, but when they call you up and say they want you at their birthday party, or I miss you, I haven't seen you for so long, I've been worried about you, it's actually very selfish because they're demanding a part of you. Smearing. It subtly grabs every part of your thinking. She wants to bring you to a place where you need nothing or nobody but her. Monopolization of time. According to Angela, the question of abuse would often arise in these sessions. She tried to tell me many, many times I'd been abused. False allegation. That's why I had fears around my sexuality. Everybody who came to her, Craig told her, had suffered some form of abuse at some time in their life. You've been talking about yourself for 2 hours and what a terrible victim you've been all your life. And this is the moment she asks, have you been abused? Everything in the room is begging you to say yes, but I just haven't. And then she would imply that I was not ready to deal with it. Grandiosity telling somebody how they should think. For Angela, the breaking point came after she'd been seeing Craig for 18 months, and she received an offer of work abroad. But Craig, she said, tried to pressure her not to go. Nullification of threat to control. She said it would be selfish because I would be breaking the intense connection we had that was allowing her to help me, and we would then both have to work 100 times harder. Threat. Ignoring Craig, she took the job. Separated from Craig, she told me she finally resolved her sexual uncertainty and decided to come out as gay. It was the happiest day of my life. Returning to England, she began to skip her sessions with Craig and avoid her phone calls. At length, Craig sent her a message saying it was time for Angela to go on with my journey without her. I think Anne was very messed up about it. I literally thought she had the answers to my life in her hands, Angela said. That's how much power I handed to this woman, completely. When the journalist asked Craig about Angela, she said that Angela was a very complicated character. Child abuse can be physical, sexual, or emotional, or it can be the result of neglect. In all forms of abuse, the common factor is psychological trauma and the long-term damage it can do to the mental health of the victim. The past cannot be revisited, only invented. Stories become exaggerated, facts misplaced, distorted, or forgotten. Memory is a fragile anchor to our versions of ourselves. Our family history is a part of this. There are moments of rupture, upset, but life goes on, fences are mended, harsh words forgotten. Then to this placid pool of memory a drop of ink falls, and then another, and another, until the pool is dark and murky, and we can no longer distinguish between what is true and what is imagined. Discussion of false memory in therapy first began to emerge in America in the 1980s, at a time when increasing numbers of women, it was mostly women, were coming forward claiming that in the course of psychotherapy they had recovered repressed memories of being sexually abused as children. The growing number of such cases gave rise to concerns within the psychiatric profession that suggestive questioning by therapists could result in memories of trauma that are objectively false, but in which the person comes to believe strongly. The term false memory syndrome is controversial. It is not recognized as a psychiatric condition, giving fuel to critics and abuse survivors who maintain that claims of FMS undermine the plight of genuine victims and provide a cover for paedophiles. But Professor Chris French, the head of the Animalistic Psychology Research Unit at Goldsmiths, University of London, and a member of the Scientific and Professional Advisory Board of the British False Memory Society, says he is in no doubt that the phenomenon of false memory is genuine. Therapy, he says, is almost the perfect environment for generating false memories. A therapist who is predisposed to look for evidence of sexual abuse, for example, might easily influence their subject to remember it. And once the client has accepted the possibility of repressed memories of abuse lying at the heart of their problems, and they have developed what Professor French calls a shared understanding with the therapist that recovering those memories is part of the therapeutic process, it is very easy for false memories to appear. Professor Elizabeth Loftus, an American cognitive psychologist and one of the world's leading authorities on the malleability of human memory, has written of how dream analysis in therapy can be especially problematic in the hands of a therapist who discusses sexual abuse during the day, causing sexual material to appear in the patient's dreams at night. The therapist then uses those dreams as a resource to reconstruct supposed childhood sexual abuse. The danger that these questionable activities might lead to a patient to a false belief and memory that sexual abuse actually occurred is more than a passing risk. Many therapists, Professor Loftus explained, will never admit that they have acted as a spur to false memory and are probably not even aware they are doing something terribly wrong. The human cost of false memory can be enormous. The person who believes they have been abused is deeply traumatized. They are 100% certain it has happened. Families are torn apart. because the person who thinks they've been abused will cut off or completely ostracize anyone who doesn't accept that it has actually happened. The therapist becomes like a guru. In April 2015, the Crown Prosecution Service decided not to prosecute Anne Craig, and the charge of fraud was dropped. Freed from her bail conditions, she started to see both Victoria and Laura again without charging for her services. No longer their personal development coach, she had now become their friend. Lack of boundary recognition, further assertion of control. Both Victoria and Laura explained that Craig was the person they trusted most in the world. It was Craig who put the journalist in touch with them. The photographs that he had seen of Victoria at society parties and gallery openings showed a willy and gilded young woman in a party frock. The person that he met in a cafe in Kensington looked tired and drawn. She was wearing an anorak, jeans, and work boots. She had a whippet with the word service dog printed on its lead. It made her feel safer, she said. If you had to choose one word to describe her, it would be fragile. Speaking hesitantly, she described an unhappy childhood, family arguments, her parents' divorce when she was 16. As a teenager, she had developed an eating disorder, which had worsened during her A-level years. I just couldn't help deal with life at all, she said. She had seen a number of therapists and counsellors, but none of it was working. I guess things were very repressed and I needed to go deeper. When she met Craig in 2010, she said, I knew that was right. At first, she would see Craig once a month, but gradually the meetings became more frequent. Once a week, then twice a week, assertion of control, with daily exchanges of emails and phone calls, lack of boundary recognition, hoovering, assertion of control. For 7 years. Things don't get better quickly, Craig said. But then Victoria started to open up, this thing that was underneath that she couldn't get to. I would feel these really violent emotions that I knew were linked to my parents, but it wasn't quite clear how. Certain things would come up in these sessions, a memory or some kind of issue, and then I would write about it, talk about it, draw it, taking it back to the root. This was, of course, a phrase that had been used before. At the end of a session, Craig would put her hands on the top of Victoria's head to connect with your energy and feel what's blocked, magical thinking. And if the emotions are blocked, she can open them up so things come out. Each day, she would email Craig details of her dreams for analysis. It was through these processes, she said, that she would get a flash of seeing things and remembering. It had been suggested, the journalist said, that these sessions had led her to remember things that had not actually happened at all. That wasn't true, Victoria said. How can someone tell you you're remembering something? They just can't. When I relax and let the memories come out, it's so powerful and so frightening, but it's such a relief at the same time. I'd got to a point where I didn't trust what was in my mind, my emotions, so I didn't want to let anything come up to the surface. But Anne helped me relax and trust myself. Victoria talked about how it had been necessary to cut herself off from family, isolation, and friends, because once you step back and start looking at your relationships, you realise how unhealthy they are. They were all informed by my relationship with my parents, and they were very destructive. I didn't really want to accept it. But when you're confronted with the truth, you can't really deny it anymore. Her voice trailed into silence. Under the terms of a family trust, Victoria was due to inherit a large sum of money, but in 2014 she had insisted on withdrawing from the inheritance. How could I accept money from a family I didn't want to be part of? With Craig's encouragement, manipulation, she had twice given statements to the police alleging historic crimes. But nothing has been done, she said. I think that's really sinister. The cafe was closing for the day and we walked in a nearby park where she could let her dog off the leash. For the past few months she'd been living in a squatters' camp near Heathrow Airport. The journalist got the sense she was unhappy and felt unsafe there. Laura Hugh Williams was living in the same squat. They had not known each other before becoming involved with Craig, but had got in contact following her arrest. Victoria had now been seeing Craig for almost 7 years, but it seemed there was no end in sight. It's not going to be instant. All the time I'm confronted with traumatic things. Every day there's something that comes up. So no, she could not foresee a time when she would not need Anne Craig. We will be returning to what Victoria has to say at a future point. following events in this recollection. We now turn to the mother's story. In her London flat, Sarah Strutt spread out an assortment of family photographs, letters and Mother's Day cards, all drawn by her daughter, Laura. The messages in bold, exuberant handwriting, best mum ever, and thank you so much for always being there for me and giving me everything I asked for, even if it is not the easiest thing to do, even if you think I do not realise, I do, and I love you very much. Strutt and her daughter, she said, were like soulmates, but neither had seen nor heard from Laura in the 4 years since her last letter, saying she was breaking from the family for good to grow and heal my spirit from the damage done. Strutt told me she still had no idea of what that damage could be. Born in England, Laura spent her early childhood in Monaco, moving with her family back to England when she was 9. In 2006, she began a 3-year course at the Charles H. Cecil Studios, enjoying it so much that at the end of the course she stayed on for an extra term. In 2009, her parents divorced. Laura returned to England, intent on making her living as an artist. Shortly afterwards, she started seeing Craig. She told her mother that Craig was teaching her about chakras, the ancient Indian theory of energy points in the body. Strutt thought it sounded like doing a yoga class. In addition to her painting, Laura had also taken up the guitar and begun writing her own songs. In the winter of 2010, she moved into a disused pub, the Cowshed in Notting Hill, along with 2 other artist friends from the Florence days who were also seeing Anne Craig. All were on their journey, dutifully following Craig's instructions of writing down their negative thoughts, manipulation with their left hand, and ritualistically burning them in a bin on the balcony of the flat to release the energy back into the universe, as one of the girls put it. Laura staged an exhibition of her work at the Cowshed, again following Craig's directions to draw and paint with her left hand. At the Charles H. Cecil Studios, she had been painting portraits, highly accomplished in a classical style. Her new work was altogether darker. One particularly striking piece was a figurative representation of a mound of dead bodies. It was in the spring of 2011, when Laura was 25, Strutt told me that her daughter's behaviour became more worrying. Laura wrote a letter to her boyfriend of 4 years, breaking up with him, and another letter to her mother saying she needed time to herself to work on her art and music. I trusted Laura. She's incredibly sensible, and if she wanted a bit of time apart, it didn't worry me. She said it was nothing personal, Strutt said. But Laura was retreating deeper into herself. She cut off all her old friends and closed her Facebook account. She told her mother she wanted to be left alone, that she was healing my head. Then, for a while, Laura disappeared altogether. Eventually, Strutt discovered that she had taken a job teaching at an art school in West London. Strutt and her husband Henry waited outside one afternoon. It was almost a year since she had seen her daughter. Laura looked startled to see them. Henry said, "Laura, when I first knew you, you adored your mother." And she said, "Yes, I adored my mother." He said, "Has she done anything to upset you since that time?" And she said, "No." So he said, "You adored her before and she's done nothing to upset you since, so we just go home together." Laura, Strutt said, started swaying. Her head went down as if she didn't know what to say. And then suddenly, her whole body changed. She put her head in the air and said, "It's not for me to tell my mother what she's done, it's for my mother to find out." And then she walked off. And did Strutt know what her mother meant by that? She shook her head. "I don't think she knows what she meant by it. There is no reason." Throughout all of this, Strutt told me her daughter had kept the same email address and phone number. I used to regularly text and email her. She never answered, but I thought if she didn't want to get these messages, she would surely have cut me off. But in January 2014, Laura wrote to her mother to tell her she was disinheriting her family and cutting all ties to her past. She changed her number and moved to the same encrypted email server as Craig. Victoria would also move to the same server. Manipulation, assertion of control. In 2015, Strutt gathered all her family except Laura in France for her 60th birthday. Everything was perfect, she told me, but I just woke up on my birthday and burst into tears. You put everything into this box with the lid on, and then it just bursts open. What makes it such agony, apart from the agony of missing her, is that there is no reason for any of it. It's not as if there was a row. It was just Laura walking away from a very loving family. The family, Sarah Strutt told me, had been driven out of their minds with worry and at a complete loss to know what steps to bring Laura home. In 2015, she hired Steve Hassan, a former member of the Moonies who now writes and lectures on cult behaviour, to fly from America and conduct a workshop for the family and friends of Laura and Victoria. He said, "We mustn't forget the real Laura is alive and well in there," Sarah Strutt said, but what he said was, her own light bulb has to come on. But what, Strutt wondered, could flick the switch? Laura's story. The journalist met Laura in a cafe in an unlovely suburb at the end of the Northern Line. She was exhibiting a piece of work in a pop-up show staged by an arts collective. Tonight was the opening. She talked about growing up in Monaco in England, and with remarkable candour, about deeply personal issues to do with her body that she said had troubled her throughout her childhood and adolescence. It was a picture that bore absolutely no relation to the description of the exuberant, happy young woman described by her family and friends. She talked of how these issues had instilled a sense of disgust in her, to the point that by the time she was a teenager, she went completely off the rails with alcohol and drugs. In 2010, she was introduced to Craig. She wanted to resolve her body issues and to develop as an artist and a musician, and thought that Craig could help her. She also, she said, had a gut feeling that things had happened that I couldn't remember. I just knew it in my heart that if anyone could help me unpuzzle my path a bit more, it was her. She began to describe vague memories from her childhood that she said had left her deeply traumatized, and which she had repressed. Among the memories that had come to the surface, she said, was one of having been badly mistreated by a relative who had died when she was 3 years old. I have flashbacks of him. It was just all the time. The journalist later discovered that actually Laura was only 18 months old when this relative died. I know my parents are trying to say it's false memory syndrome, but it's not. She paused. It's so hard. Unless you're inside my body to feel it, when I work something out, everything sort of slots together. It's not even like a mental memory, it's a physical memory. On one occasion, she had experienced what she described as a massive breakdown. For 3 days, I was vomiting and had diarrhea, and I felt like there was a knife in my stomach. After that, more of my memories opened up, like it had to happen physically. I talked to Anne about it, and you tried to piece it all together. Was she not concerned that Craig had no training or qualifications to deal with the sort of issues we've been describing? I think it's in the result you get, she said. Laura had never seen a trained therapist, but I don't know how much they would have taught me to open myself up, which is what Anne has taught me. She has this talent to help people understand their traumas. Evidently brainwashed. Craig, she said, was a dear friend I dearly cherish, someone who's very wise and can help me. We finished our drinks and walked to the empty shop space where the art show was taking place. The journalist had seen photographs of Laura's paintings, but the work she had in the show was a conceptual piece. It was a rubber glove suspended upside down in a metal frame, with water trickling from a pipe into the hand of the glove, and then dropping through pinpricks in the fingers into a bucket on the floor. We stood and watched it. Drip, drip, drip. It was about her mother, Laura said, but it occurred to the journalist that it was actually about Craig. In the legal stratagems that had been employed against Craig since 2013, a recurring theme was money. The one charge the police had pursued following her arrest was fraud, although that had been dismissed. But Craig's fees for her sessions were hardly exorbitant, and she insisted that she was far from wealthy. She had spent an enormous amount on legal fees and was £20,000 in debt. She had never been motivated by money, she said. The journalist believed her. He believed that her motives were far more complex than that. He met Craig for the second time in the lounge of a London hotel. He ordered a coffee. She asked for a glass of water. She wanted to talk more about her background, she said, to help me, the journalist, better understand her work. She was brought up in a household of 8 women, 7 girls and her mother. She was the 5th daughter. Her mother's family had been comfortably off. Her uncle owned a large farm, where Craig's father worked as a labourer. He was an alcoholic. She said, very controlling. But her mother always had dreams. She started her own catering company, and Craig painted a picture of herself as a dreamer too. This suggests that potentially her father was a narcissist and may well have generated a lack of control environment. The mother worked in nursing, but it didn't suit her. And then, Craig worked in nursing, but it didn't suit her. And after going into the airline industry, she moved into the field of personal development. It was at that point, she said, that she underwent counselling herself for her own development, and the issue of childhood trauma started coming up. She stated, "I knew there was something that had happened to me as a child, because I had no relationship with my father at all. You have a feeling inside, but you don't know where it's coming from. But it wasn't until I was on the counselling course going into therapy, self-exploring, that I thought, well, obviously, I need to open up something here, and as you open it up, it makes sense." The counsellor advised her to go to Ireland to confront her parents. They cut off all connection with her from that moment on. But the shape of her life was cast. "Everything I've done," she told me, "I've known is for a bigger purpose." And what, the journalist asked, is that purpose? "The reason is very much to open up the violent abuse of women." She took a sip of water. "That," she said, "is really what my journey is all about." Which tends to suggest that she has some concept of a saviour syndrome about her. It was 1991. She returned to England and worked counselling the unemployed. It was then she had what she described as an emotional breakdown. "I didn't realise that all the stress had accumulated and how it was affecting me." Her doctor referred her to a man named Russell Jenkins, a healer who practiced homeopathy and Reiki. And that really was the start of something incredible opening up on a different level together. In 1999, she moved from Hampshire to London, but she and Jenkins would continue to talk regularly on the phone. "I was still getting panic attacks, but I would call him and he would always be there to help me and calm me down." She spoke of him with a respect bordering on reverence. Jenkins died in 2007 at the age of 52 after injuring his foot treading on an electric plug in his home. The wound turned septic, and Jenkins, a diabetic, sought advice from a homeopath who suggested that he treat it with Manuka honey. He died from gangrene caused by the bacterial infection. An inquest was told he had refused to have conventional medical treatment after his inner being had told him not to. After coming to London, Craig explained she had spent 7 years taking myself apart, emotionally, physically, mentally. She saw very few people. She was doing a tremendous amount of work on herself, opening up my dreams more and looking into the past. It seems that she had moved past working in personal development in the professional sphere. She applied for various jobs, but nothing came of it. She even consulted a careers advisor. They told me, "You're a nonconformist, don't try to go back into another job. You're not going to fit in." Russell would say the same thing. "You have to do your own thing from the heart." She paused. "I have always had a very strong inner sense of what I need to do. It's just a very strong belief coming from a much deeper place within me, that this is my journey and this is my purpose." She began to advertise her services, offering a holistic approach, using healing energies in a safe, secure and private environment, taking on mostly female clients. At Craig's instigation, the journalist spoke with an American woman now working as a yoga and meditation instructor, who had sought help from Craig after the breakup of her marriage. Anne said, "My work takes a long time and I go very, very deep, and I wanted that." The American said, "Anne was the perfect person. She talked about how the universe guides you to what you really need, but not everyone is paying attention, so we miss opportunities. How our cells hold on to memories, and how Craig, by being intuitive and connected, had helped her to strip through the layers and get to the root cause of her difficulties." After a while, the journalist felt that he was losing the thread. Another former client, a woman, was in her 40s and training to be a counsellor herself when she first started seeing Craig around 2009 for help in dealing with issues arising from the early death of her father. She had seen Craig half a dozen times over a period of around a year and said she found her to be very sympathetic and helpful. Craig did not watch the clock during her sessions. It was important, she told me, to work without a time limit. I would go to Russell and he would never rush. If it took 2 hours, you would stay with him for that time. And I thought, okay, when I start dealing with people, if someone needed 3 hours, 3.5 hours, I would give them that time. I'm like a dog with a bone at times. If I sense we haven't quite got what we need to get, I'm not going to let that person walk out of the room. Control. Note it's based on what she says is needed rather than what they actually need. I'm going to quietly stay with them encourage them to get it, and then the two of us will instinctively know, yes, we've got it. I can be incredibly annoying at times, but also incredibly insightful. When the group of young women, starting with those from the Charles H. Cecil Studios, first started coming to her, she went on, it was as if it was the next stage of my journey I was ready for. She quickly began to recognise a thread, she said. What kept coming up, she went on, was the extent of abnormal relations between siblings, with every single one. Every single one. The journalist said that it struck him as inconceivable that in a random sampling of 6 or 7 young women, all would make exactly the same claim. No, it's not, said Craig. What it really is it's the group they're in. It's nothing to do with people randomly. So was she suggesting that this was because the girls were all from comfortable middle-class backgrounds? Yes. It had taken time and patience, she suggested, for this information to emerge, but the bulk of the work she had been doing up until her arrest had been concerned with a single question, she said, where is the root? There's something going on here that I'm not quite getting. When in April 2015 Craig resumed seeing Victoria and Laura unpaid, the relationships had long since ceased being professional, lack of boundary recognition. At the end of it, she went on, there would be 2 people, Victoria and Laura, who would be able to help change other people's lives, as she, so Craig said, had changed theirs. But hadn't she simply created a dependency in the girls? It was clear from talking with Victoria that she was highly dependent on Craig. In a sense at the moment she is, but gradually she won't be, and she will become more reliant on herself. She returned to her allegations against the girls' families. The reason they had pursued her, she said, was to silence the girls, blame-shifting, and to silence her, because of what I know. Her tone became more urgent, more conspiratorial. Tori would say one thing to me, and a couple of days later, Huey, Laura, would say something else, and I was thinking, why are they both talking about very similar things and about memories and about this? So I had to have 2 people who weren't linked and who would kind of divulge the same information to me at different times to get me to start believing this really happened. Otherwise, I wouldn't have believed it. Given the fact that it was her journey to root out abuse wherever she could find it, did she not think she was consciously looking for it in the young women who came to her? Absolutely not. But these young girls were telling me things, and I would come out of the room reeling. There were, she went on, much deeper things going on. Elements within the police were working with the perpetrators of these crimes to prevent the truth from coming out. Paranoia. Every time somebody tries to open it up, it gets closed down. I'm doing it in a different way, if you like. You can say I'm guided. I know what I'm doing. Grandiosity, magical thinking. The journalist was reminded of something she had said at their first meeting, when he asked why girls who had come to her for help had ended up cutting themselves off from their families. But what's so wrong with that, she said. There are loads of people in life who decide they're not going to see their family anymore. The real question was about the massive secrets their parents were trying to conceal. She would never have spoken out had she not received that letter from the Caledon's lawyer all those years ago, and the harassment, she sighed. It goes on and on and on. She started to cry. Pity play. If you asked me to describe myself in 2 words, she said, I would say I'm kind and I'm brave. A typical narcissist that believes that they are a kind person helping people. In July 2015, Craig filed a series of complaints against the Metropolitan Police, claiming unlawful arrest, neglect and a failure in duty to investigate the leaflet that had been posted through her and her neighbours' letterboxes. The police, she claimed, had not undertaken an impartial investigation, instead showing deference to high-profile family members of the alleged victims and imposing bail conditions that had prevented her, Craig, from conducting her work. In February 2016, she was informed that in each particular there was no case to answer, and that her claim had not been upheld. The ruling, she told me, was further proof of the conspiracy. Paranoia. Charles Kaiser, Amanda Caledon, Timothy Hugh Williams and Sarah Strutt have all described any allegations of abuse of any kind made by their daughters as absurd and unthinkable. All believe that Craig is responsible for turning their daughters against them. All say they will not rest until their daughters have come home. What most frustrates Strutt, she told me, is that the law offers no protection or remedy in a case such as this. There is nothing to prevent this happening to other families in the future, or for families such as us to take any kind of legal action. You're watching your child, who one moment is the most loving, adoring child, who says there is nothing more important than family, pulling away to the extent that they become a stranger, and you're helpless to do anything about it. In March 2016, Sarah Strutt wrote to Craig, mother to mother, pleading with her to tell Laura that she had done incredibly well and finished her journey and it was time to come home to her family. Please imagine, Strutt wrote, how sad you would be without Tara in your life. I thought it would help Anne's safe face, Strutt told me. Craig did not reply. Nullification of threat to control by staying in a position of withdrawal. When I asked her why not, she repeated the allegations that Laura had made against her mother. Did she not feel, the journalist asked, that it would be beneficial for the young women to try to rebuild some kind of relationship with their families? They have to make that decision themselves, she said. I cannot make that decision. But it was she that the families held responsible for their daughters cutting themselves off. Craig was silent for a moment. I had a dream a while ago, she said at last, and in the dream it said you, the journalists, were taking their side. The journalist said that he wasn't taking sides, he just wanted to get to the truth. When the journalist met Craig for a third time, she'd left London and moved to the country. It was now 7 years since she first started seeing Victoria and Laura for personal development. She was still seeing them, probably once every 3 or 4 weeks, she told the journalist, but talking to them on a daily basis, hoovering assertion of control. Also, of course, one queries in her sharing all of this detail about them that she was breaching confidences, lack of boundary recognition. Things in her own life were changing, she said. She decided that it was time to follow a new path. She would not be taking on any more clients. There was a purpose in all of it, and it was to open something up, and I have achieved that. If I look at how my dreams are developing, I will know what the future is. I want to be that voice that comes to people and says, you can heal. Saviour complex, grandiosity. This, she said, was my journey. It was shortly after this that the journalist learnt from Craig that Victoria had left the squatters' camp and, so Craig told me, gone abroad. Laura too was believed to have left the country. I emailed them both. They replied that they had no wish to be in contact with the journalist. Craig too had cut off contact with the journalist. No one knows where either of the girls are, not a single member of their families, nor any of their old friends. This demonstrates the control that a narcissist had over two vulnerable individuals, pulling them away from their family. It also shows the range of manipulations that are utilised and the magical thinking that she engaged in, believing that she had this special talent to read dreams, which she utilised to influence individuals with catastrophic effects for their relationships with their family. Her position as this life coach enabled her access to vulnerable people, which she could then exploit in this way for the pursuit of the prime aims, as I explained at the beginning of the video. But there's a further twist in all of this, as you will hear in part 2, as Victoria then came forward a number of years later to talk about what actually went on and what she had experienced. Join me there for further revelations.